Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is HarrisX founder and CEO, Dritan Nesho. Dritan, thank you so much for coming back on.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
You have a HarrisX Forbes poll hot off the press. This comes after the attempted assassination against Donald Trump over the weekend. What are your biggest takeaways? What are voters feeling right now?
Well, it was an unprecedented event, or at least an event that hasn't happened in over 40 years since the shooting of former President Ronald Reagan. And the assassination attempt was a shot heard around the country and possibly around the world. Within 24 hours, over 9 in 10 voters had heard, read, or seen footage of the assassination attempt. So the majority of everyone within the country. And there was some deliberation in the beginning. Is this an assassination attempt, or is it something else? Some news media outlets even came under scrutiny for not calling it an assassination attempt. And the voters, three-fourths of them, 77%, basically said yes. There's no doubt that what transpired was an assassination attempt on the former president, and certainly a very grave occurrence at that.
As you said, people were hearing this, seeing this, reading this, and how they were doing that is via media coverage. So, what did people think about the media coverage? Because you did allude to it at the beginning. The media did face some scrutiny as the situation was unfolding on Saturday.
That's right. So we asked them, how did you find out about the shooting of Donald Trump? And essentially, the go-to sources were very mixed. Everything from the 31% who said online news portals to 30% that said local TV news, 30% social media platforms, 30% heard it from friends and family, and about 30% from cable and network news. So essentially, people heard about the event from many different sources. And then we asked the follow-up question for each of the sources that they said they'd heard or read or seen about the event. Was the coverage fair and sympathetic, or was the coverage unfair and biased? And I would say that in two-thirds of the cases or more for each of these specific channels, people felt that the coverage was largely fair and sympathetic. So they don't look down on the news media in terms of how it covered the event. They thought by and large that the news media was cautious in the beginning and then fairly pivoted to calling it what it was, an assassination attempt.
I think one of the biggest questions to come out of this event on Saturday was, how did this happen? And there have been a lot of questions to both local law enforcement as well as Secret Service that a shooter could get such a clear line of vision to a former president and presidential candidate. So how do voters feel about the Secret Service right now?
Well, there's a remarkable consistency in the reaction of voters towards the Secret Service. On one hand, 75%, three-fourths of them, and this includes an overwhelming majority of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, believe that it was a grave oversight not to have blocked access to the building 150 yards away from Donald Trump, which obviously gave a clear line of sight to him. And they don't believe that this isn't part of the operating procedures. They actually see this as a problematic oversight. That said, 68% or two-thirds, and again, it includes majorities of Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, believe that the Secret Service acted fast and they didn't hesitate. And 81% believe that the Secret Service acted with bravery rather than failing to do so. And this is very much in line also with Trump's own message after the event, where he served the men and women of the Secret Service for protecting him. We also asked sort of an overarching question, which is, what comes closer to your view? The Secret Service had problems in its preparedness and its response to the shooting, and there should be an investigation of how it reacted to the shooting of the president, or the Secret Service did an admirable job and acted as fast as possible, and therefore such an oversight or an investigation is not needed. The numbers are closer. 55% said there should be an investigation. 45% said it's not necessary. But still, there are concerns among voters that the building was not blocked, and therein lies the problem, and therein lies obviously the reason why there was this event.
Aside from the question of how, there also is a larger question of why this happened. And there are many unknowns as of now, as of when we sit here, about the alleged shooter. But what are some of the reasons and who are people blaming here?
I'm glad you asked. So together with the team at Forbes, we listed a list of possible reasons that could be the root cause of Donald Trump's shooting. It's not surprise to anyone that the top reason was a deranged shooter at 59%, followed closely by 50% or half of voters who said political polarization. But where the picture gets interesting, and you see also strong partisan splits, is in terms of who's to blame for the rhetoric and the environment that led to this shooting. And actually, 44% said that Donald Trump and his own rhetoric is one of the root causes of what happened. 34%, by comparison, said it's the rhetoric of the Democratic Party and the Biden campaign. So they're not far off, but they're still about 10 points aside, and it reflects a long held view that, at least up until now, in past events, Trump has done more to use overheated rhetoric than the Democrats have and Biden's campaign has. That doesn't absolve the Democrats and Biden, and we'll get into some other questions that we ask in a second. But that was an interesting picture. Above and beyond that, people also say that mental health issues are at play. 41% lack of gun control, 39%, and then 30% blame the news media and the rhetoric of the news media as well.
So dive a little deeper there. I mean, it's no secret how politicized things have gotten within the past really 8 years, and the rhetoric, the political tone has really notched up quite a few levels. You're saying people from both sides of the aisle think that Republicans and Democrats need to turn the temperature down.
That's right. That's right, and that came across clearly in the poll. It will be available to everyone to see, but we also put forward a series of statements and ask people to agree or disagree with these statements, which are largely things that observers have pointed to as having happened. And to the statement, radicalization and political violence in America has been on the rise the last few years. 89% of Americans said that is true, and they agreed with that statement. 89% of Americans don't agree on pretty much anything in modern polling, but they agree that radicalization and political violence is on the rise. Above and beyond that, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to note, I mean, that's a really startling statistic there, that something that almost all Americans agree on is that political violence is on the rise. And I feel like when you see some of these moments that really transcend party lines, there is a question of, will this unify the country? Do people feel that it will?
So I think that the expectation of people is that there'll be a moment of unity, and then it'll dissipate, right? We asked the question, do you think the shooting of Donald Trump will work to unify the country and curb overheated rhetoric, or will it divide the country further? 41% say it'll work to unify the country. 59% say it will divide the country further. There are big differences between parties. Democrats and independents are on edge. 72% of Democrats say it will divide the country further, including also 62% of independents, whereas 58% of Republicans say it will work to unify the country. But the basic point here is that people are saying, tone it down. And they're sending a clear message to several stakeholders within the political system to do that. To the news media, 77% say that the current media environment demonizes political candidates. Again, that's three-fourths of voters saying you've got to do better. Two-thirds said, Trump has promoted heated rhetoric, polarization, and political violence in the past, and has got to do better going forward. A similar number, 64%, said the core message of the Biden campaign and the Democratic Party that Trump is a threat to democracy and liberty and autocratic in waiting. They say that it's gone too far, 64%. And they also, 58% say that calling Trump a threat to democracy and an authoritarian in waiting going forward is a form of incitement of political violence. And that rhetoric is just too much. So, regardless of who you put in front of voters, they're disappointed in everyone. And they're basically saying you're all to blame, almost in equal proportions, for getting us to this point. And what they want going forward, they want a focus on the future, a focus on issues, rather than a focus on heated rhetoric, right? And how we got to where we are.
I think that's a perfect segue, Dritan, of how this will impact the 2024 election, because the last time you and I talked was about a poll after the debate. And between the debate and up until Saturday, the main point of conversation when it's about 2024 is President Biden's fitness, President Biden's mental acuity, his performance at that debate, and then at rallies, as well as interviews after. That has largely been muted since Saturday after the assassination attempt. So how has this event from Saturday impacted 2024?
Great question. In one regard, it's too early to tell, right? And public opinion still needs a little bit of time to settle. In another regard, a lot will depend on what happens going forward, especially in the Republican National Convention, but also how both of the campaigns and both of the parties address this specific event. What is clear from the data, and we asked the question, has Donald Trump's shooting and the events of last week impacted a voter's choice for president in 2024 or not? What we see clearly is that it has energized Republicans, and it will be a very strong turnout tool for Republicans. 54% of Republicans said they're more likely to vote Republican. Only 3% said they're more likely to vote Democrat, and the rest said, 43% said it doesn't make a difference. So that's essentially half of Republicans saying that they're more likely to vote for Trump because of this event. When you look at Democrats, 7% of Democrats now say they're more likely to vote Republican, 40% say they're more likely to vote Democrat, and 53% say it hasn't made a difference. So a little bit less energy amongst the Democratic camp, a little bit the concern about the inevitability of Trump being elected isn't resonating as strongly amongst Democrats. And then for independents, 7 in 10 out of all the independents say it doesn't make a difference. And by a very small margin, 19% to 11%, say they're more likely to vote Republican than they are to vote Democrat. So bottom line is that this might affect turnout, but so far it hasn't affected the horse race. And, we're not really seeing a bump for Trump or a rally around the hard candidate effect so far.
Dritan, I just want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly, because in all of these numbers, you're saying that there is a small group of Democrats that are now leaning to vote for Trump in light of Saturday's event. Is that correct?
Yes, it's about 7% who said that they're more likely to vote for Trump after this weekend's event. To some extent, this isn't unusual because Trump has always pulled about 10% of the Democratic vote his way. And also we have to wait and see a little bit whether this perception from these Democrats is sustained or if it dissipates. But yes, there is some goodwill amongst Democrats, 7% of them, and then certainly amongst independent, 19% said they're more likely to vote for Trump than they are to vote for Biden after the event.
Drayton, in light of the attempted assassination of President Donald Trump, how is this impacting the horse race here?
Great question. The horse race hasn't changed at all, or at least it hasn't changed yet, and it's to be seen what effect there is on the horse race. Last time we released polling together, Trump was ahead by 4 points when we looked at the two-way race between him and Biden. And then when you factor in undecideds, he was ahead by 2 points. Today, he's ahead by 3 points. And when you factor in undecideds, he's again ahead by 2 points, 51% to 49%. And the reason for that is because the electorate has dug its heels. Conventionally, the electorate breaks up in 40% who support one candidate, 40% who support the other candidate, and roughly 20% in the middle. They like both candidates, but they haven't made up their mind. In today, you have that 20% in the middle that doesn't like either of the candidates. They still haven't made up their mind. And events like this, which tends to play on sympathy, are less likely to move the horse race than strong positions on issues or a strong issue platform that really speaks to those undecided in the middle who basically say that they don't want either Biden or Trump to be on the ballot in November. And so no change so far, but we'll be monitoring very closely together with Forbes.
And let's talk about approval ratings specifically. President Biden right now sits at a 40%, and that's a similar number that you and I have been talking about now for months. But right now, we are less than 4 months away from an election. As an incumbent, what's that mean for him?
Well, I mean, it's certainly low, right? And it, as an incumbent, President Biden faces challenging prospects for re-election with an approval rating that's so underwater. The picture is also not much better when you look at Kamala Harris, whose approval rating is even lower at 39%, and who does even worse in the horse race in our poll compared to Trump. So the Democrats have to do something. The Biden campaign has to do something going forward because the last month started off with 2 bad weeks for President Biden coming out of the debate, and now we're entering a cycle which is a positive cycle for President Trump after he survived the assassination attempt. Two-thirds of voters say that he showed great courage and bravery and defiance, standing up right away after the assassination attempt. So as the convention, the Republican convention comes to an end, A, will be looking whether or not there's a bump and the horse race changes meaningfully. But B, we also have to look at the Democrats and see what are they going to do to change the dynamic of the race right now, which isn't looking good for them.
And now let's move on down ballot here. How are both Republicans and Democrats feeling about Congress?
Well, Republicans have had an edge in our polling of about 1 to 2 percentage points when it comes to the congressional race. When you look at national polling, that's enough to make a big difference down ballot. Usually, something like 86% of all Congress people who are running for reelection get reelected. That's a historical statistic. And then it's really about 14%, in some cases less, that are really susceptible to competitive races. So that 1 to 2% that we've been seeing regularly in congressional ballot could make a big difference, and it very much tracks what we're seeing on a national level as well, with President Trump being at least 2 points ahead of President Biden, no matter how you splice and dice where the horse race stands.
Ever since the debate last month, it seems like the conversations have largely moved away from talking about the top issues, those issues that really matter to voters. But what are those issues? Are they still the economy, inflation, immigration? What did you find?
Absolutely. So not much has changed in terms of voters' concerns. By a margin of almost 2 to 1, or a factor of almost 2 to 1, they voters feel that they are worse off today in terms of their personal finances rather than their personal finances improving. That's because price increases and inflation is the number one issue that they say is facing the country today and is facing them today, followed by immigration, which is second at 30%, the economy and jobs third at 24%, and then you have a drop off from there in a series of other middling issues like guns, crimes and drugs, healthcare, which are roughly at 15 to 16% each. So the top issues remain the same. They are tabletop issues. They relate to affordability. They relate to inflation. They relate to the health of the economy. And then certainly there's a big concern about the southern border that I would say is the second biggest issue in the country right now.
Dritan, from what we know, what are you watching out for next as the RNC continues, as the DNC is next month?
Well, voters are clear in that they want the Republican National Convention to focus on a vision for the future, to focus on issues, and to focus on solutions. 89% said that they would rather have that than a litigation of why we ended up where we are, why the shooting happened, why the dynamic of this race has had the dynamic that it has. Again, as I mentioned before, 9 in 10 Americans seldom agree on anything, and it's very clear that voters are overwhelmed by the rhetoric. They are underwhelmed by the lack of solutions being brought forward by the major parties and their candidates, and they actually want a race for the next 3 to 4 months that's really focused on problem solving, that's focused on common sense, that goes beyond personalities. And I will say that so far, the Trump campaign has played into that. And that's what they're trying to give voters with their restraint and with essentially focusing on the future, less so the events that transpired 48 to 72 hours ago.
Dritan Esho, I always appreciate our conversations. I appreciate the numbers and the expertise you bring. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you to the team at Forbes. See you soon.